Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
More support, better comfort, and 25% lighter than what they were making before. These are the claimed benefits of the Superfeet Sport Ultralight insoles should you slide a pair in your football boots. Are these claims actually true though? Let's find out. Where I guess we'll start with a little unboxing where you'll find some pictures of the insoles, what they're more or less designed for, some tech specs, more or less the basic information that you would want to know about these insoles, and then open it up on the top and you'll find on the inside are the actual Sport Ultralight insoles, where if you're familiar with the Superfeet product line, all of their different insole variants tend to have a different color. For hockey skates, it's always been yellow. In the case of the Sport Ultralight, designed specifically for low profile footwear, like a pair of football boots, the color scheme they've gone for is kind of like this teal greeny blue with the Superfeet logo in neon yellow, with the insoles themselves being made up of three main elements: a fairly standard mesh liner on the surface, a single layer of Super Rev foam that, as you can see, is definitely on the thinner side, and then their EvoLite carbon infused patented arch support system here in black, running from the heel into the midfoot. A single pair of replacement insoles that can be yours, here's where I think I'm going to lose a lot of people, for $65 US. Where, let's be honest, if you're not too picky, you could actually get a whole new pair of football boots for that amount of money. We're not to defend the price tag because they are undeniably expensive. If you were to compare the cost of these to a custom-made orthotic insole, something that you're seeing the vast majority of pro footballers wearing in their boots, those are going to be 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 times more expensive than these Superfeet, depending on what you're getting and where you're getting them from. Where if the name of the game is better comfort and more arch support from a pair of insoles that are going to fit in your low profile football boots, $65 for these isn't crazy. And it must be said, given Superfeet's reputation, I've worn Superfeet in a bunch of different shoes and my hockey skates for pretty much as long as I can remember. They're quite durable. So one $65 investment is probably going to last you multiple pairs of football boots, meaning that you're not necessarily going to have to buy a new pair of insoles every time you change your boots. No matter what though, it's a lot, and to some, simply not worth it. But if you are interested in a pair, they're available via the link down below. Where I guess let's start out by being brutally honest. What I have here is the insole from a pair of F50 Elites, a $260 pair of football boots that, as you can see, is made from a single layer of this flimsy white foam. It has some perforations through the midfoot and has this really nice kind of synthetic suede lining on the surface. It's a decent pair of insoles as far as what you can expect from a standard pair of football boots. However, in the grand scheme of premium insoles, they're still pretty cheap and flimsy. However, in comparison to the Superfeet Ultralight, these feature a mesh liner on top that admittedly still feels and looks relatively premium, but at the same time is quite basic, and it's made from a single layer of their Super Rev foam that, as you can see, is maybe even a little bit thinner than that of the insole from the F50, albeit maybe the foam is a smidge higher quality, but if we're talking about that being a step up from these F50s, it's a very small step. Meaning that what you're really paying for here is the carbon-infused EvoLite arch support piece, which of course spans the entire heel and then flows under the arch of your foot, stopping pretty abruptly at the base of the forefoot. If you didn't tell me it had carbon fiber in it, I probably would have just guessed that it was plastic. However, credit to Superfeet, it is very solid and very well structured, where if you were to compare these to a custom pair of orthotic insoles as an example, versus, let's say, the Curex Cleat Pro insoles that I've reviewed on the channel in the past that also have an arch support piece, but one that's very flexible, a custom-made orthotic would trend more in the direction of these Superfeet Sport Ultralights, in that the arch is just more solid, holds its shape, and therefore, at least in theory, provide more support. What's better or more comfortable for you is ultimately a matter of opinion, but as it relates to Superfeet insoles specifically, this has been their original recipe that has made them what they are today, which is a very popular aftermarket insole company. Whereas you can see from this angle, the insoles definitely have a fairly pronounced arch, and I guess what really makes them stand out from other insoles that I've tried in football boots is that arch support is going to hold its shape and structure because of this solid one-piece construction and very strong material, where if you're finding that your football boots are uncomfortable because your arch is not supported and it's collapsing inside of your football boots, this is definitely going to make an immediate impact. Where it must be said, this is not a custom-made orthotic. It is one specific shape that Superfeet has determined will work well for the vast majority of people, and I genuinely do believe the vast majority of people will find that these are just way more supportive than the stock insoles, and therefore probably more comfortable as well. However, there is still that chance that this specific shape doesn't necessarily work well with your foot type, and in the event that were to happen, Superfeet does mention on the box that they offer a 60-day guarantee if you're not completely satisfied with the comfort of your new insoles, where in the event that you are not liking them, they do say they'll make it right. So at the very least, if you are skeptical as to whether or not you'll like the way that these feel, you can get in contact with Superfeet after the fact and probably get a refund if you don't find them comfortable. As far as how these fit in the vast majority of football boots, I would say for the most part, they work well. Of course, like any other aftermarket insole, they're sold in a wide range of sizes. And then from there, it's kind of up to you to trim them to the correct shape. What I like to do is take the stock insoles from the boots you want to use them in, slide them on top, and then just kind of cut along the edges so you end up with the closest shape possible. However, you will notice when I put them on top of each other, there's some extra width along the sides, and certainly when you compare the height, particularly in the heel and midfoot, this carbon fiber infused piece is going to add extra bulk and volume inside of your football boots, meaning that if your boots are right now a 10 out of 10 on the tightness scale with the stock insoles, it's very likely that when you throw in these Superfeet, they're going to eat up more volume inside of the boots, resulting in your football boots now being too tight. Of course, this is not going to be an issue for the vast majority of people, and as long as you're not finding that your boots, like I said, are incredibly tight as it is, having this eat up that little bit of extra volume is probably not going to be the end of the world, and a nice trade-off for that extra arch support. Although it must be said, because of this added material, your heel is elevated a little bit, your midfoot is elevated just a little bit. And again, we're talking about maybe a millimeter or two. It's not a lot, but those minor differences do make a difference in the way that your football boots feel. I do think for the vast majority of people, especially if added arch support is something that's super important to you, you'll definitely find these Superfeet insoles more comfortable. But even as low profile as this design is, they are bulkier than what you're going to find from the very thin and flimsy stock insoles. But again, I don't want that to scare you. These will fit quite well in the vast majority of football boots. With the final thing we need to talk about being the weight, especially when you consider how thin and flimsy a stock insole is. This is part of the trickery that big brands use to shave the total weight of their football boots. If they put the thinnest possible insole in, it doesn't add much in the way of weight, where with just about any aftermarket insole, simply put, they're more substantial, they're more premium, they're designed to be more comfortable, and therefore are almost always going to weigh more. How much more, however, that's what we're about to find out. This being an F50 Elite insole in a size 9.5 US, this being the Superfeet Sport Ultralight trimmed to the same size. We'll start off with the F50 insole, and you can see that they weigh in at a ridiculously light 13 grams, which is basically nothing. Then if we throw on the Superfeet insoles, you can see that they weigh in at significantly more, 41 grams. which for those doing the math at home is just over 3 times heavier than the stock insoles, at least in a pair of F50s. Obviously, every football boot is going to have a little bit of a different base weight for the insole itself. But like I've talked about throughout this entire video, it's a trade-off that you have to be willing to make if you want potentially better comfort and certainly more arch support, because from this 13-gram stock insole, you're really not getting any of that. Where in conclusion, simply put, the Superfeet Sport Ultralight insole is the most supportive aftermarket insole I've ever worn in a pair of football boots. But I'll be honest, I expected that. Superfeet has a reputation for making great and very supportive insoles. These are no different, and the fact that they are low profile enough to work in the vast majority of football boots is a pretty cool technical achievement. Having said that, they're not cheap, and at the end of the day, a little bit of a niche product in the sense that if you're wearing your football boots with the stock insoles right now and not having any issues with discomfort, I don't necessarily think you need to rush out and buy a pair of Superfeet. Where on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you perhaps wear aftermarket insoles or even custom orthotics in your everyday shoes and are missing that added support in your football boots, something like these Superfeet Sport Ultralight insoles, even at $65, might be worth your while. Where if you need some extra support and or want to eat up a little bit of extra volume inside of your football boots, this is a pretty solid product.